The Penitent of Ivy Lane. She had been standing on our landing for some minutes before she knocked. I know this because I heard the stair creak at 10:20, and the knock did not come until nearly past, and in between there was nothing at all, which is a particular kind of silence. "Mrs. Iredale," said Mrs. Hudson, and went out and shut the door with the care of a woman who has decided something is wrong and is not going to say so. She was perhaps 34, in black that had been good 4 years ago, with a plain, strong face and very steady hands. She did not sit until Holmes asked her twice. When she did sit, she sat on the front 6 inches of the chair, and she looked at the fire, and not at either of us. "I am told you find out things that other people cannot," she said. "That is a generous way of putting it. What have you lost?" "Nothing. That is the difficulty." She drew a breath. "Mr. Holmes, 5 years ago, my husband burned to death in his own study, and the jury said it was an accident, and it was not. I did it. I did not mean to do it, but I did it, and I have said nothing for 5 years, and I cannot go on. I have come to be hanged, and I have brought the fare down and back, and I would like it done properly." Holmes had been leaning forward. He sat back. "You will find," he said, "that the machinery for that is in Whitehall Place, and not in Baker Street. There is a police station in Marylebone Lane, 4 minutes from this door. I am not a magistrate, madam, and I have no more power to hang you than the cabman who brought you." "I know that. I have been to a police station." Her mouth moved. "I went in September to the one at Forest Hill, and a young constable took me into a back room and gave me a cup of tea and told me I had been unwell, and asked whether there was anybody at home who could come for me. I went again in November, and the sergeant remembered me. He was very kind." She said the word as though it were an injury. "They will not have it. The inquest is over. It was 5 years ago, and there is nothing left of it but a burnt floor, and nobody will look, because everybody was so sorry for me. Tell me what you believe you did." "I know what I did." She looked up for the first time. "On the 15th of March in '92, at about 10:30 at night, I took my husband his cocoa into the study, and my sleeve caught the reading lamp, and it rocked, and I put my hand out and steadied it, and I set it back, and I did not set it back properly. I put it near the edge. I remember thinking, that is not straight, and I remember thinking, he will move it. And I went up to bed, and at 10 minutes to 12 the study was alight, and by 12:30 there was no study." "And afterwards?" "Afterwards a great many people were very good to me," said Mrs. Iredale, "and I let them be, and I have let them be for 5 years. Mr. Holmes, my son is 17, and he is going into a house at Bristol at the quarter, and I have been asked to be married, and I find that I cannot do either thing. I cannot let that man take me and not know what he is taking. I have tried to write it down, and I cannot make it stay written. So I have come to somebody who will not be kind to me." There was a silence. The fire shifted. "Madam," said Holmes, and his voice was not unkind, but it was quite flat, "I am going to tell you plainly what I think, and then I shall put you into a cab. A woman who believes she has killed her husband and cannot be rid of it has an illness of the mind, not a case. The proper man for you is a physician, and after him, if you insist, a clergyman. My friend Dr. Watson can give you a name in Wimpole Street this morning. I do not investigate remorse. There is a great deal of it about, and it is nearly always the cheapest explanation of a life that has gone badly. She took that as I have seen soldiers take a wound, without any noise. "Yes," she said, "that is what I expected." She stood up and set on the table a folded square of newspaper, brown at the creases. "That is the account of the inquest out of the Kentish Mercury. You may keep it or burn it. Good morning, sir. Good morning, doctor." And she went out, and we heard her go down the 17 stairs at the pace of a woman with nowhere to be. "That," I said, "was disgraceful." Holmes was filling his pipe. It was accurate. It was neither. You have just told a woman in real distress to go and see a nerve specialist, and you did it in the tone you use for people who bring you horoscopes. Watson, in the last 4 months, I have been offered a haunted mangle, a curse upon a family of hop factors, and a gentleman who wished me to prove that his late aunt was signaling to him through the price of tin. Grief is an inventive faculty. It manufactures agency because agency is easier to live with than accident. He got the pipe going. She wants to have caused it. If she caused it, the world has a shape. If a lamp fell over, the world has none. That is a very good speech, and I do not believe a word of it. He looked up. Then give me your grounds, and give them to me as a doctor, and not as a man who dislikes seeing a woman turned out of doors. I had them. I had been assembling them since she sat down, in the way one does at a bedside, and I found that I was more certain of them than of most things. First, a woman with a fixed delusion of guilt is ill in other ways as well, and she is ill visibly. She does not sleep, she does not eat, she is voluble, she repeats herself, she smells of neglect. That woman is well nourished. Her hands are steady, her boots are mended, her hair is done, and she gave you a date, an hour, and a sequence of 5 actions without one repetition and without one adjective. That is not the mind of a melancholic. That is the mind of a witness. Go on. Second, the melancholic's guilt is enormous and vague. She blames herself for everything and for nothing in particular. This woman blames herself for one small, clumsy act, and she is precise about how small it was, and she is not the least interested in being forgiven. She did not once ask us to tell her it was not her fault. She asked to be hanged, which is a different thing entirely, and much rarer. And third, since you always have 3. Third, I said, she has held it for 5 years and told nobody, which no melancholic ever manages, because the whole disease is the telling. And she has come now, this month, because her son is going away, and because a man has asked her to marry him. That is not a symptom. That is a woman, under a new pressure, doing the only honest thing left to her. Holmes did not answer for some time. He had picked up the folded square of newspaper and was reading it, and I watched his eye go down the column twice. "Emlyn Iredale," he said, "aged 41, traveler to a firm of seedsmen in the borough, died at his house the Larches, Ivy Lane, Forest Hill, on the night of the 15th of March, 1892. Fire confined to the study on the ground floor. Verdict, accidental death, with a rider expressing the jury's sympathy and recommending the greater care of paraffin lamps. He turned the paper. 9 witnesses. The widow was not called. Not called? Not called. She made a written deposition which the coroner read out, and which the Mercury summarizes in 11 words. He looked up, and there was a change in him that I had not seen when she was in the room. Watson, I withdraw the nerve specialist. I do not withdraw my opinion, but I withdraw the specialist. It is one thing for a woman to imagine she overturned a lamp. It is another for nobody in 5 years ever to have asked her a single question about what she saw. Then you will look at it? I shall do worse than look at it. I shall go to Somerset House and to a coroner's officer in Lewisham and read every word of 9 depositions, and if at the end of it I find a lamp that fell over, I shall come back here, and you will make me a very handsome apology for having wasted 3 days of my life. He was already up and reaching for the Bradshaw. And if I find that it did not fall over, then that woman has been walking about London for 5 years, asking policemen to hang her for somebody else's work, and I shall want to know who let her do it. Forest Hill in that spring was a place of new brick and old hedges, going up the hill in terraces, with the fields still showing between them, and Ivy Lane was one of the older bits, 6 detached villas behind Laurel, and 1 shop at the corner that sold everything. The Larches was the 4th. It had a green gate, a scraped path, a monkey puzzle in the middle of a small lawn, and a bay window on the left of the door where the study had been. The brick round that window was a different brick, newer and pinker than the rest, and the pointing had not weathered. You would not see it unless you were looking. I found that I could not stop looking at it. She opened the door herself and stood quite still. "I have not changed my mind," she said. "I have changed mine," said Holmes. "May we come in? I have no comfort for you at all, Mrs. Iredale, and I want 2 hours of your time and every dull thing you can remember." The room they used was the back parlor, with a piano in it and a photograph of a heavy-shouldered man with a mustache on top of the piano. There was a boy at the table with a book who got up when we came in, a long-limbed lad of 17, with his mother's steadiness and, I thought, none of her strength yet. "My son, Owen." "You were 12, said Holmes. 12 and a half, sir." "Do you remember it?" "I remember Mother getting me out of the window onto the wash-house roof," said Owen. "And I remember Mr. Underhill coming up the lane in his nightshirt with his coat over it, and the brigade coming from the top of the hill, and Mr. Bracker's dog. I don't remember my father at all that night. I'd been asleep since 9. "Who is Mr. Underhill?" The boy looked faintly surprised that anyone should need telling. "He teaches at the school, and he plays the organ at St. Bede's. He lives at the end of the lane." "He was my husband's oldest friend," said Mrs. Iredale. She said it in the flat voice she used for facts. "They were at school together at Ashby 30 years ago. He has been very good to us." "How good?" "He paid for Owen's schooling from the year after, and he would not be thanked for it, and he would not have it called a loan. He comes every Sunday. He has done every single thing that wanted doing, from the funeral to the drains, for 5 years." She folded her hands. "He is the man who has asked me to marry him, and it is because of him that I came to you. So I would rather you did not sit there thinking what you are thinking." "I am thinking that I should like to meet him," said Holmes. "Now, the 15th of March. Begin at your dinner and leave nothing out because it is ordinary. The ordinary is all I want." She told it, and I set it down that evening, and I have it still. They had dined at 7. Her husband had come home from the borough at 6, with a cold coming on, and had been short with the boy about a broken window catch, and she had been short with him, and it had not been a good evening. And this, she said, was the first thing, because it was the last conversation they had, and it was about a window catch. At 8 the boy went up. At 9:30, Emlyn went into the study with his order book and the lamp, because he had a fortnight's returns to make up for the spring seed trade, and he was behind with them. He always worked in the study with the door shut. He did not like the sound of the piano through a wall. At 10:30 she made cocoa, because he had a cold, and took it in. He was at the desk, with his back half to me. The lamp was on the corner of the desk on the left, where it always stood. I put the cup down at his right hand, and as I turned my sleeve, took the lamp. She was looking at the tablecloth. It rocked. It did not go over. I put my hand flat on the base and steadied it, and the flame went up and smoked the chimney and came down again, and I moved it because the cup was where the lamp wanted to be, and I set it further along, and I knew when I set it down that it was too near the edge, and I did not put it right because he said something. What did he say? He said, "Leave it, Rhoda, for God's sake." She stopped. He had a cold, and he was behind with the returns. He said it 100 times a year, and he never meant anything by it. That is the whole of what he said to me in his life, at the end of it, and I went out and shut the door. And then? I washed the 2 cups, and I turned the gas out in the kitchen, and I went up at about 11:15. Did you sleep? No. Did anything happen between 11:15 and the fire? She thought about it. I remember her thinking about it. She turned her wedding ring twice on her finger, and then she said, "No, nothing at all." I lay and listened to him being angry through the floor, which is what I always did. And then, at 10 minutes to 12, Mr. Brocker was in the lane shouting. And the study? The window was out and the curtains were gone, and the whole of the inside of that room was one flat sheet of flame with no shape in it, said Mrs. Iredale, like the inside of a lamp glass. And I got Owen onto the wash-house roof. Holmes had not moved for 10 minutes. "Thank you," he said. "That is a good account, and you have told it before." "Not once," she said. "Not in 5 years. Nobody has ever asked me for it." "Then who deposed at the inquest to the position of the lamp?" "Mr. Underhill," said Mrs. Iredale. "He called that night to bring the music for the Sunday, and he looked in at the study door to say good night to Emlyn, and he told the coroner that the lamp was standing near the edge of the desk when he saw it at 11:15. She smoothed her skirt. "He did that for me, Mr. Holmes. He never said one word about my being in the room, And he could have. Afterwards, he told me it could do no good now, and that I was to say nothing about the cocoa, and I never have, till I said it to you. Who let him in that night? I did. I was on the stairs when he knocked. What passed between you? Nothing. Nothing at all. She frowned slightly at being asked so small a thing. I said Emlyn was in the study and in a bad temper, and I said something silly, the way one does, about having nearly had his lamp over and got myself murdered for it. And he laughed and said he would risk it, and I went up. Holmes rose and went to look at the photograph on the piano, and stood with his back to us for a moment, and asked her whether the house had been repapered since. Desmond Underhill lived in the last house in the lane, a smaller villa with a good many books in it and a harmonium in the front room, and he gave us tea out of a pot he warmed first. He was a heavy, mild man of 46, going bald in a way that made him look older and kinder, with square spectacles and ink on the second finger of his right hand. He wore a grey suit that had been brushed a great many times. If you had asked me to describe him half an hour after leaving him, I could have told you almost nothing, except that he had been civil. "She has been to you," he said, before Holmes had asked anything. "She has. I am glad." He set down the pot. "I am more glad than I can tell you, Mr. Holmes, and I hope you will not think it strange in me. I have been trying for 4 years to get her to speak to somebody, and she would not, and I could not make her, and I have never known what it was." "You do not know?" "I know she was not the same woman after the fire, and I know she has never once said Emlyn's name aloud in my hearing." He looked at his hands. "I supposed it was the ordinary thing, grief and the shock of it, and the boy to keep. But 5 years is a long while, and lately it has been worse and not better, and I did a foolish thing in the autumn. I asked her to marry me. I had asked her once before, 2 years ago, and she said no in a way that let it be asked again. This time she said no in a way that did not, and she has been ill ever since, and I have blamed myself. You have known her a long time." "I introduced them," said Underhill, "in 87, at a choir supper. Emlyn and I were at school together at Ashby, and I had known him since we were 9 years old, and I brought him to a choir supper because he was dull and lonely in London, and there was Rhoda Beale singing second alto, and that was the end of it in about 4 minutes. He smiled. It was a small, worn, entirely convincing smile. I have thought since that I might have spoken first. I did not. One does not at 24, if one is me, and the other man is Emlyn." "He was to have gone away," said Underhill. "Did she tell you that? At Lady Day. He had taken a place with a seed house in Cardiff, which was his mother's country, at 180 a year and a house, and they were giving up the Larches at the quarter. I had known about it since the January." He put the lid on the pot. "I had made up my mind to it. One does." "You cared for her?" "Mr. Holmes, I have cared for her for 10 years, and I have never said so to a living soul until this minute. And I am telling you now, because you will find it out in a day, and I would rather you had it from me than from Mrs. Breaker over the hedge." He said it without heat and without shame. I did not want him dead. I wanted him to be better to her. There is a great deal of difference, and I have had 5 years to be certain of it. Tell me about that night. I came up the lane at about 11 with the anthem for the Sunday, which I had marked for him, because he sang bass and could not read a change of key to save his life. Rhoda let me in. I put my head round the study door, and Emlyn was at his returns, and he said something short to me, and I said I would leave the music on the hall table, and I did, and I came away. Was the lamp lit? It was. You are certain? I am certain, because I remember thinking the shade wanted washing, which was a mean little thought about a man in his own house, and it is the last thought I ever had about him. Underhill took off his spectacles and rubbed them. I told the coroner the lamp was near the edge of the desk, and it was, and I have wondered since whether I should have said it, because a man who says a thing like that at an inquest is telling 12 tradesmen that somebody in that house was careless. But it was true, and one says what is true. And you went home? I went home and read till 12, and then Bracker's dog began, and I looked out, and the sky over the lane was orange. Anyone in the lane as you came away? Not a soul. It was a raw night, and there was no moon. We walked back down Ivy Lane in the dusk, past the 6 villas, and Holmes said nothing at all until we were at the corner shop. Well, I said. He is the second man this month to tell me the exact truth about himself before I asked for it, said Holmes, which is either candor or a policy. Note the timing, Watson. He put his head round the study door at 11. Bracker gives the alarm at 10 minutes to 12. The house had 50 minutes in it that nobody has ever accounted for. And until this morning, nobody had ever thought there was anything to account for. Sam Bracker lived next door but one, and was 72, and had been waiting 5 years for somebody to come and ask him. He took us into a greenhouse full of pelargoniums and talked for half an hour, and I set down here only what mattered, which is a smaller proportion of it than he would have liked. I'd been up to the top of the hill to my daughter's, and I come back on the last but one, and I was at my own gate at 10 minutes to 12, near enough, because I looked at the clock in the passage after, and it was 2 minutes to when I got the water. He wagged a finger. Now I'll tell you what I've told everybody, and nobody's ever wanted it. That fire didn't grow. Explain that. I've seen fires. I was at the Kennington oil wharf in '69. The old man leaned forward. A fire in a room starts in a corner, and it takes its time. It runs up a curtain, and it gets into the ceiling, and it feels about, and you've got 5 minutes and sometimes 10 before she's away. That room was away when I first clapped eyes on it. All of it at once, right across, floor to top, like you'd opened an oven. There wasn't any corner to it, and the window went out at me before I'd got the gate open. You said this at the inquest? I said it, and the coroner said, "Thank you, Mr. Bracker," and asked me what time I heard the dog. He sniffed. There's not a man on a coroner's jury in Forest Hill has ever seen an oil fire. They'd all got a lamp in their heads before they sat down. Who came? Everybody come. Underhill was up the lane before I'd got my boots on, and he'd his coat over his nightshirt and no collar, and he went in at that front door twice before the brigade come, hollering for the boy, not knowing they was out the back already, and he got his hands done. Bracker shook his head slowly. Whatever else, he got his hands done. His hands were burned? backs of both of them, and his wrists, and he'd his sleeves rolled. He'd bandages on for a month, and he took the choir practice with them on. The old man's voice changed. I'll tell you a thing about that night, and then I'll shut up. There's nobody in this lane that would have said a word against Desmond Underhill. Nobody. Not one. Holmes was quiet all the way to the corner. Do you know what he was doing? He said at last, when he went in at that door twice with his sleeves rolled. Saving the boy. He was saving the boy, said Holmes. That is exactly what he was doing, and he was doing it in earnest, and if the roof had come down, he would have been under it. Do not simplify him, Watson. Nothing in this case is going to be helped by making him into a monster with a plan. He set a room alight at 11:45, and he ran into the same house at midnight and burned his hands to the wrists, and both of those are true. And until I understand how they sit together in one man, I shall not understand any of it. Reuben Iredale kept a corn chandler's shop in Sydenham and did not want to see us. He was a smaller, sourer version of the man in the photograph, with the same heavy shoulders and none of the moustache. And he took us into a back room that smelled of linseed, and stood with his arms folded and his back to a sack. If she's sent you, you can tell her from me she'll get nothing. Nobody has sent me. Then what do you want? The 15th of March, 92. His face closed like a door. I've said all I've got to say about that, and I said it at the time, and I'm not saying it again in my own shop. You said very little at the time, said Holmes. You were not called. You were in Ivy Lane that night, and you have never been asked why. I have seen men go white. This one went a bad gray from the collar upwards. Who told you that? Mr. Bracker's dog, said Holmes, which barked at 20 minutes past 10, and again at 20 past 11, according to Mr. Bracker's deposition, and which Mr. Bracker swore only barks at people it does not know. It knew Mr. Underhill perfectly well. He has fed it for 6 years. Whom did it not know in Ivy Lane at 20 past 11 at night? Reuben Iredale sat down on the sack. I never went in, he said. That's God's truth, and it's the whole of it. I stood at that gate for the best part of half an hour, and I never went in. Why were you there? Because I owed £112, said Reuben, to a man in Rye Lane, and my brother had it, and my brother had told me in January that I should never see a farthing of it while he lived, and he was right and all, because it would have gone the same road as the rest. His hands were between his knees, and I stood at that gate to ask him again, and I could hear the lane, and I could see his lamp, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand in front of Emlyn and be told a third time. So I went off down the hill, and I got drunk at the Perry Vale, and I've been paying for that half hour ever since. You were seen leaving? I don't know what I was. I know I was in a cell at Croydon by 2 o'clock in the morning for being drunk and shouting, and I know that when they let me out at 9, there was a boy on the corner selling papers with my brother's name on the front, and I've never told a soul in this world where I was that night, because how do you say it? How do you say, I was standing at his gate at 11 o'clock, asking him for money in my head, and I was in the lockup when he burned? Holmes was very still. You saw his lamp, he said. I saw his window. Was there a light in it? There was, when I come up the lane. And when you went away? Reuben Iredale looked up at him with a dull, exhausted patience, the look of a man who has been asked the wrong question for 5 years and cannot see that this one is different. "I never looked back," he said. "You don't, do you? One more thing. While you stood at that gate, did anybody come out of the house?" "The schoolmaster," Reuben shrugged. "Underhill. He come out about 1:15 and went off down the lane the other way, towards his own place. He never saw me. I was in the hedge like a thief, which is what I was." "He was carrying nothing?" "He'd nothing in his hands. He was doing his coat up." We went to the coroner's officer at Lewisham the following morning, and Holmes had the depositions out on a table by 10:30, and did not leave them until 4. There were 9. I will not set them all down. Bracker, the neighbour, who saw the flame first, his wife, a constable named Wynne, who was the first man into the hall, the superintendent of the Forest Hill Brigade, Underhill, a clerk from the Seed House, who proved that the deceased was behind with his returns, and low in his spirits, the servant, Millie Dawes, aged 19, Dr. Merridew, who made the medical examination, and the widow's 11 written words. Holmes copied out 3 of them entire, and made a plan of the room from the brigade superintendent's account, and then we went to the Kent and Surrey Fire Office in Cornhill, where a policy of £150 on the building had been paid without a murmur in the May, and where a clerk of great age produced from a basement the file of the assessor, Mr. Tapsell, together with Mr. Tapsell's plan, drawn in a fine hand upon squared paper, with the charring marked in 3 depths of shading. Holmes laid the plan on our table in Baker Street that night, and put the lamp down beside it, and I saw him smile for the first time in 4 days. "Watson, come and look at a fire." "I am looking at a drawing." "You are looking at the best drawing I have seen in 10 years, made by a careful man for a purpose that had nothing to do with murder, which is the most reliable kind of evidence there is." He put his finger on the paper. "The desk stood here, in the bay, under the window." The lamp stood on the left-hand corner of the desk. That is agreed by everybody, including the woman who moved it. Now, Tapsell shades the charring in 3 depths. Where is the deepest? I looked. By the door, and along the wall between the door and the fireplace. 9 feet from the desk, and under the desk itself? 2nd depth, and the desk's own legs are standing, 2 of them. The desk's own legs are standing. Holmes sat back. A paraffin lamp holds a pint. Knock it off a table, and you get a pool of burning oil under and about the table, and the fiercest burning is where the pool is, and the wood over the pool is eaten through first. It cannot be otherwise, because fire has no opinions. It burns where the fuel is. Tapsell's deepest charring is 9 feet away from the lamp, along a line running from the door to the fireplace, and there is nearly a gallon of it. Nearly a gallon? Look at his note in the margin. Boards burned through, joists charred to half-thickness, over an area of some 14 square feet, in a room otherwise gutted, but with the floor sound. 14 square feet burned through, Watson. You do not do that with a pint of lamp oil. You do that by pouring. I sat down slowly. He wrote that in a report, and nobody read it. Everybody read it, Nobody had a reason to disbelieve a verdict that had already been given by 12 men 3 weeks earlier. Holmes turned to his own copies. And now the medical evidence, which is worse. Dr. Meridew deposes to death by burning. He records extensive destruction, and he records a fracture of the vault of the skull, and he attributes the fracture in terms to the fall of masonry from the chimney breast. And Tapsel's plan shows the chimney breast standing to the ceiling, with the mantel shelf in place and its own marble cracked but unmoved, which he notes because it bears upon the fabric of the building and therefore upon the claim. Holmes put the two papers side by side. Nothing fell on that man's head. I found that I had to walk about the room. Holmes, is there anything in the deposition about the air passages? There is not one word. Then he did not look. I could hear my own voice going hard, and I did not mind. A man who dies in a fire breathes it. There is soot below the larynx, and there is soot in the trachea, and in a bad case you will find it in the smaller tubes. And it is the one examination that separates a man who burned from a man who was burned. It takes 4 minutes, and it wants nothing but a knife and daylight. It is not in the deposition, because Meridew never opened the neck, and he never opened the neck because there was a widow and a boy and a verdict of accident, and he did not want to make a distressing business worse. "He was a kind man," said Holmes, "in a district where everybody was kind, and he has cost that woman 5 years. Sit down, Watson. There is one more thing, and it is the smallest." He read it out. It was 3 lines from the deposition of Constable Wynne, who had been first into the hall, and who had gone back in with the brigade at 1 in the morning, and had picked certain articles out of the ashes. "I recovered from the fender the metal parts of a table lamp, being the base and the burner, the glass being gone. There was no oil in it. I gave the same to Mrs. Iredale's brother-in-law about a week after, with a watch and some keys." "There was no oil in it," said Holmes. "Wynne puts that down as an ordinary observation. Everybody who has read that sentence for 5 years has read it as proof that the lamp emptied itself onto the floor and set the room alight." "And you read it how?" "I do not read it at all yet." He folded the copies. "I read it when I have the lamp in my hands. Tomorrow we go back to Ivy Lane, and I want to know what became of a burnt brass lamp that a constable handed to a corn chandler in Sydenham in the March of '92, because if it went on the fire, I have lost the best thing in the case." For 2 days after that Holmes was in the Borough, and I did not see much of him, and when I did he was in the state of suppressed pleasure that I have learned to be wary of. On the Thursday evening he came in at 7, threw his hat at the bust, missed, and said, "Watson, I am afraid I am going to hurt her." "You have an answer." "I have an answer I do not like, which is generally a sign that it is the right one." He spread his hands on the table. "Emlyn Iredale travelled in seed for Gaskin and Marley of Union Street. A traveller in that trade collects small sums in cash from a great many nurserymen and market gardeners, and pays them over on the Friday. In the winter of '91 and '92, he was £311 short in his collections." I whistled. 300 on a salary of 160 and a commission. The house did not know it at the time. It came out in the audit that spring, after he was dead, and by then it was made good, and nobody had any interest in raking it. But there it is in the collection book, in his own hand. 2 years of small false entries, and the man who kept that book was in trouble to the eyes. Holmes sat down. Now put it together. A man in secret difficulties. A clerk's deposition that he was behind with his returns and low in his spirits. A house insured, and an insurance office that pays £150 without a question in the May. A study door that shut, a family asleep, and nearly a gallon of oil poured on the floor between the desk and the door. You are saying he did it himself. I am saying that the man who poured that oil had every reason to be the man sitting in that chair, and that a great many men have chosen fire, and that a verdict of accident is worth a good deal more to a widow than a verdict of suicide, both in the parish and at the insurance office. He looked at the fire. And I am saying that if that is the answer, then Mrs. Iredale has spent 5 years hanging herself for a lamp, when the truth is that her husband went out of the world on purpose and left her to raise his son on the proceeds. I would rather tell her almost anything else. He told her on the Friday morning in the back parlor at the Larches with the photograph on the piano behind him, and he told it well and gently and completely, and she heard him out to the end with her hands in her lap. Then she said, "No, Mrs. Iredale, I have the collection book." "You may have 40 collection books." She was quite calm. "Mr. Holmes, you have never met my husband, and I lived with him for 13 years. He was a heavy, worrying, disappointed man, and he was hard on the boy and hard on me, and he could not keep money. All that is true, and you may write it down. But he was frightened of pain. He would not have the dentist. He fainted at the barber's when he cut himself. He kept a bottle of chlorodyne by him for a bad tooth, like a child keeps a candle. Her chin came up. He did not sit in a chair and set light to a gallon of oil. He could not have held his hand in it for a count of 3. Whatever happened in that room, that did not happen. There was a long pause. I have known Holmes to be told he was wrong perhaps a dozen times in 20 years, and I have never known him take it as he took it that morning, which was without a word. "And there is one thing more," she said, "which you will find out, and which I would rather say. He made it good in January. The whole £311 went back into the book in 1 week in January, and I know, because he was a different man for a fortnight afterwards, and I thought the cold had lifted off him. Where did the money come from? From Mr. Underhill, said Mrs. Iredale. Emlyn told me in February. He had gone to Desmond in the December and told him the whole thing, and Desmond sold out something of his mother's and gave him £300 and would not take a paper for it. And Emlyn cried when he told me, which he had not done since Owen was born. She smoothed her skirt in the way I had come to know. So you see, he was out of it. He was clear, and he had a friend, and he had a fortnight of being a different man, and then he had a cold and a window catch and a bad temper, and then he was dead. That is why it cannot be what you say. We walked down Ivy Lane in silence. "Well," I said at last, "you have been beaten by a widow." "I have been beaten by a fact I did not trouble to look for, which is the only way anybody is ever beaten." He stopped by the green gate and looked at the pink brick round the study window. "Watson, I have been 3 days building a very handsome staircase against the wrong wall. I had a man in difficulties, and I stopped there, because difficulties are such a comfortable motive. I never asked what happened to the difficulties. They were paid off. They were paid off in the January by his oldest friend, and 8 weeks later he was dead in a room with a gallon of oil on the floor, and the money is out of the case altogether." He put his stick under his arm. "Which leaves me with no motive whatever, and I am obliged to you for not saying so. It was I who found Millie Dawes, and I record the fact with more satisfaction than is becoming. Holmes had been shut up for a day with the depositions, and had said, in the manner of a man throwing a bone, that the servant might conceivably be worth an hour if she was still above ground. I traced her through the parish register at St. Bede's, where she had been married in '94, and I found her in 2 rooms behind a chandler's in Peckham, with a baby on her hip and another at the fender. She was 25 and had been 19, and she remembered everything, because that was the great event of her life, and nothing since had come near it. "I've never talked about it," she said. "Not proper. My husband don't like it. He says it's morbid." "It is not morbid to me. I am a doctor." That settled it, as it generally does. She gave me tea in a cup with a mended handle, and talked for 50 minutes. She had liked Mr. Iredale in the way one likes weather, and she had loved her mistress. She had slept in the back attic, and had been woken by the mistress hammering on her door. She had carried the boy's boots down the wash-house roof in her apron, and had gone back for the canary, and been stopped by the constable, and she was still, at 25, faintly proud of that. I let her run on, because I have found that people put the useful thing in the middle of the rubbish, and take it out again if you reach for it. "They was going away, you know," she said at one point. "That's what nobody remembers now. We was all to have gone to Cardiff at the Lady Day, Master having took a place there, and I was to go with them if I liked, and I'd said I would, and I'd told my mother, and got my box mended, and then there wasn't any of it." "And what became of you afterwards?" Her face changed. "I was turned off," said Millie Dawes. "Not by her. She'd never. There wasn't the money, that's all. And I went to a place in Annerley. But I'll tell you what I've never got over, Doctor, and it's a silly thing, and I was that hurt." She shifted the baby. "It was the oil. I put my cup down very carefully. The oil? The lamp oil. It was my job Tuesdays to fill the lamps and trim them, and the can lived in the scullery under the copper, and I'd filled them on the Tuesday like always, and there was a good 3 parts of a gallon left in that can, near enough, because it was a 2-gallon can, and I'd had it filled at Wardle's on the Saturday." She was pink with the recollection. "And on the Wednesday, when it was all over and we were standing about in the kitchen, with the men tramping through, Mr. Iredale's brother comes into the scullery, and he picks that can up, and he shakes it, and he says, 'Empty. Look at that. Who leaves an oil can empty in a house?' And he says it in front of the fireman. In front of the fireman, and me, 19, and them all thinking what they thought. And it had been 3 parts full on the Tuesday. I'd swear to it on anything you like, But who's going to take a girl's word about a can, with a gentleman dead in the house? So I said nothing, and I went red, and I've gone red about it every time I've thought of it since, and I've thought of it a good deal, because it wasn't fair. Was the can where it should have been? She stopped. No, she said slowly, and that's queer, and I'd forgot it till this minute. It was stood by the back door, not under the copper. And there was another thing that went against me and all, and that was the scullery bolt. Tell me about the scullery bolt. It was drawn. She was speaking more quietly now, and the pride had gone out of her, and she was 19 again in somebody else's kitchen. The scullery door was on the latch, and the bolt was drawn back, and I'd shot that bolt at 9:30, same as every night of my life, and the constable stood there in the morning and asked me had I shot it, and I said yes, and he looked at the mistress, and the mistress looked at the floor, and you wrote something down. Millie Dawes gave a small, unhappy laugh. It's 5 years, and I can feel my face going now. They never said I done it. They never said anything. They just wrote it down. I came back to Baker Street on the top of a bus in the wet, with my collar up, and I do not think I felt the rain. Holmes was at the table with the plan. 3 parts of a gallon of paraffin, I said, out of a 2-gallon can that lived under the copper in the scullery, which was found empty on the Wednesday and standing by the back door, and the scullery bolt, which that girl shot at 9:30, was drawn back. He looked up. He did not say anything for a moment, and then he pushed the chair opposite him out with his foot, which from Holmes is a considerable ceremony. "Sit down, doctor," he said, "and say the second part again slowly." Holmes went to Wardle's the next morning, which is the oil and colour shop at the corner of Ivy Lane, and came back to the cab with a small, hard smile. "Wardle is dead. His son has the shop, and his son has the books, and the books of an oil and colour man are kept for the sake of the credit accounts, and are never thrown away, because there is always somebody who has not paid." He got in. The Larches, account of Mr. E. Iredale, 12th of March, 1892, being the Saturday. 2 gallons best paraffin, 1s 8d. Then the girl is right. The girl was right in 92, and she has been going red about it for 5 years. Holmes rapped on the roof. It does not prove that the can was 3 parts full on the Tuesday. It proves that 2 gallons went into that house on the Saturday, that the lamps of a 6-roomed villa cannot burn above a quart in 3 days, and that when Constable Wynne walked into the scullery on the Wednesday morning, there was nothing in the can at all. Somewhere between the Tuesday night and the Wednesday morning, 1.5 gallons of paraffin left that house, and it did not go up the chimney in a lamp. We went to Ivy Lane on the Saturday, and we went for 2 things. The first was in the attic. Holmes asked her, standing in the hall with his hat still on, whether anything had been given back to her out of the room. "There was a tin box," said Mrs. Iredale. "Reuben brought it about a week after, and put it on that table, and went away without his tea. There was Emlyn's watch in it, and his keys, and the works of the lamp." "Where is it?" "In the roof, at the back, behind the trunk with the christening things." "Have you opened it?" She looked at him, and I saw the thing move behind her face that she had been holding down for 5 years. "No," she said. Owen went up and brought it, and it was black japanned tin with a scratched lid, and it had a 5-year skin of dust on it, and he set it on the parlour table and stood back. Holmes turned the light of the window onto it and lifted the lid. There was a man's silver watch with the glass gone, and 3 keys on a ring, and a folded pair of spectacles, and a lamp base of heavy brass, blackened and dented, and beside it the burner, the round brass gallery with its little cogged wheel at the side, the thing that carries the wick. He took the burner out and turned it over twice, and put it under the window, and got out his lens. He was a long time. Nobody said anything. The boy stood by the piano with his hands behind him, and did not move at all. "Mrs. Iredale," said Holmes at last, "come here, please, and look at this. Not at me, at this." She came and stood at his elbow. "This is the wheel that raises and lowers the wick. Turn it toward you, and the wick comes up, and the lamp burns higher. Turn it away, and the wick goes down, and the flame goes out. Do you see where it is standing?" "It is turned right over," she said, "as far as it will go." "As far as it will go, which is off. Now look into the gallery." He tilted it to the light. "There is the wick. It is a broad, flat wick of white cotton, and about 3/8 of an inch of it is standing above the gallery, and the end of it is square, and it is brown, and it is whole. That is a wick that was turned out and let alone. A wick that is burning when its lamp goes over is drawn out of the gallery by the flame and eaten to a ragged black stub in 10 seconds, and the wheel is left standing where the hand of the person who was reading by it left it, which is up." She was quite white. "And there is no oil in this reservoir," said Holmes, "and the cap of the filler is screwed home, and the base is dented, but it is not split, and I would undertake to fill it with water at that sink, and carry it round this room without spilling a drop." He set it down on the cloth. "That lamp was not knocked off a desk. That lamp was put out and shut up and set aside by somebody who did not want it in the way, and then a great deal of oil, which did not come out of it, was poured across the floor, between the desk and the door, and the room was lit at the other end of it. Mrs. Iredale did not faint, and she did not cry. She stood looking at the little brass thing on the tablecloth for a long moment, and then she put both hands flat on the table, as though the table might be going somewhere. "It has been in my house," she said, "for 5 years, in my roof, over my head, every night. Yes, behind the trunk with the christening things. Sit down, madam." "I will not sit down." She was shaking now from the shoulders in a way I did not much like. "You are telling me I did not do it." "I am telling you that a lamp with the wick off and the filler screwed down did not set light to that room, and that you could no more have caused that fire by moving it 2 inches than by wishing it. Yes, that is what I am telling you, and I would have told you a week ago if I had been half as clever as I am reputed to be." Holmes pulled out a chair with his foot. "And now, because I am not a kind man, and there is not time to be one, I am going to ask you a question that nobody has ever asked you, and it is not what you did, it is what you saw." She sat down then. "Between 11:15, when you went up, and 10 minutes to 12, when Brocker shouted in the lane, did you leave your room?" "I have said nothing happened." "That is not what I asked you. Everybody for 5 years has asked you what happened. I am asking you what you did with your body. Did you get out of that bed The parlor clock went on. The boy had come away from the piano without my noticing, and was standing behind his mother's chair. "Yes," said Mrs. Iredale. "When?" "I don't know. Late. 20 minutes to 12, perhaps, or a little after." She had her eyes shut. "I thought I heard the scullery door. It has a way of knocking in the frame when there's a wind, and there wasn't a wind. So I got up and went to the head of the stairs and stood there." "And?" "And there was nothing. The hall was black, and the house was quiet, and I stood there like a fool in my bare feet, and I was cold, so I went back to bed." "Mrs. Iredale," Holmes had not raised his voice at all, "you were standing at the head of the stairs looking down into the hall. The study door is the first door on the left of that hall. Was there a light under it?" She opened her eyes. "I have seen a great many things in that profession and out of it, and I do not know that I have seen anything quite like the next 15 seconds. She sat absolutely still. Her lips moved once. Then her hand came up to her mouth and stayed there. "No," she said through it. "There was no light. It was dark under the study door." "Say it again." "It was dark under the study door, and I thought, he has gone up to the spare room, and I never heard him, and I was glad, because I did not want to see him." Her voice went to pieces on the last word, and she got it back. "That was 10 minutes before the room was in flames, and I have known it for 5 years, and I have never once put it beside the other thing, not once, not for a second, because I was so busy being the woman who moved the lamp." "Yes," said Holmes, "that is what it is for." Holmes took her out into the garden after that, because she wanted air, and I was left in the back parlor with the boy and the open tin box, and Owen Iredale shut the lid of it and stood with his hand flat on top. "Doctor," he said, "may I ask you something, and will you tell me the truth, and not the other thing?" "If I can." "Has she been like this because of me?" I had not expected that, and I sat down. "Why should she have been?" "Because I've thought for 5 years that I did it," said Owen. He said it in the flat, level way boys say the thing they have carried alone, and he went on before I could get anything out. "The window catch, in the study. It was broken in the January, and I broke it, larking, and I never said. And my father found it on the 15th, and there was a row about it at dinner. And he said the room was like a barn, and he'd have to sit in a draught over his returns." The boy's ears had gone red, and I've thought ever since, if the window hadn't been broken, there'd have been no draught, and if there'd been no draught, the lamp wouldn't have. That's all. I know it's stupid. I've known it was stupid since I was about 15, and I've gone on thinking it just the same. Have you ever told her? No fear. She had enough. And she has never told you what she thought? No, said Owen. He looked at me for a moment and then away. We've been very polite for 5 years, Mother and me. I don't know if you've ever lived in a house like that. I got up and went and stood at the window, because there are moments in a doctor's life when it is better not to be looked at. Out on the lawn, Holmes was standing by the monkey puzzle with his hands behind his back, and Mrs. Iredale was beside him, and she was talking, and every so often she put the back of her wrist against her eyes and went on talking. I have known him refuse to hear a client's grief on the ground that it wasted the light. He stood there for 40 minutes and did not once look at his watch. "Owen," I said, "your window catch had nothing to do with it, and I can prove that to you in one sentence, and I am going to, because I am not going to let a second person in this family spend another night of their lives on it. A broken catch does not empty an oil can." He did not say anything for a moment. "No," he said. "No, it doesn't, does it?" Then he sat down on the piano stool and put his sleeve across his face, and I went out into the hall and shut the door, and stood there for a while, looking at the hall table where a piece of church music had been left on the 15th of March. Inspector Bradstreet came to Baker Street on the Monday evening and heard the whole of it with his hat on his knee, and at the end of it he blew out his cheeks. "It's a shocking business," he said, "and I believe every word, and I would not take it to a magistrate for £100. "Give me your reasons," said Holmes. "You will be giving me his." Bradstreet counted on his fingers unhappily. "1. Your lamp. It's a good point, and I never heard a better. But a defending counsel will put it to 12 men that a burnt lamp lay 5 years in a tin box in a dusty roof, and that any wheel will turn in 5 years, and half of them will nod. 2. Your oil can. That's a servant girl of 19, 5 years after, remembering how much was in a can, and she was blamed for it at the time, and counsel will say she has had 5 years to make herself right about it. 3. Your bolt. Same girl, same answer. 4. Your medical man. Dr. Merridew is dead this 2 years, and you cannot cross-examine a deposition, and the fracture will be put down to the ceiling. And the plan? Your plan's the best of them, and it's an assessor's plan of a fire, and Tapsel's in Australia." Bradstreet shook his head. "Sir, what you have got is a beautiful demonstration that the fire was set on purpose. What you haven't got is one thing that says Desmond Underhill set it. He was in that house for 10 minutes with the wife on the stairs and the husband alive and speaking, and he says so himself and always has. He gave £300 to the dead man in the December out of his own mother's money, which the whole parish knows. He has kept the widow and schooled the boy. Put him in the dock on this, and you'll not get past the first day, and you'll have made that poor woman stand up in public and say she moved a lamp. And the motive? The motive's the worst of it, Mr. Holmes, begging your pardon, because it cuts the other way. Counsel will say, here is a man who loved her, and who could have had her by waiting for the Cardiff post to go bad, and who instead paid £300 to keep her husband out of prison. There's your character, gentlemen. He stood up and turned his hat round. I'm not saying no. I'm saying that if you want that man, you will have to get it out of him, because I cannot get it out of the evidence. When he had gone, I sat for some time looking at the fire. He is right, I said. He is entirely right, and he is a better policeman than he is given credit for. Holmes was standing at the window with his hands behind him. Consider what was done here, Watson. Not the killing. Anybody can kill. The other thing. Say it. He needed a woman in that house who would never think about that night. He spoke slowly, and without any relish at all. There is only one way to make a person stop thinking about an evening, and it is not fear, and it is not affection. It is shame. A frightened witness talks to somebody in the end. An ashamed one never does. And better than that, she cannot look at the evening straight, because every time she turns her face to it, she meets her own fault first and flinches off. She had told him at her own front door that she nearly had the lamp over. He had that in his hand within a minute of walking into the house. And at the inquest, he stood up and swore to the one fact that would fix it on her for the rest of her life. And he did it in a way that made him her protector. And then he went to her and told her to say nothing about the cocoa, because it could do no good now. He gave her the guilt. And then he spent 5 years being the only man in the world who knew about it and forgave it. That is what she has been leaning on. That is what he built. Holmes turned round. And that, Watson, is also the whole of my case, because a man does not do such a thing for a house or for £150. He did it to be the person she could not do without. Bradstreet cannot put that to a jury, but I can put it to him. How? By taking it away from him, said Holmes. On the Tuesday he took me down to Forest Hill again, and would not say what for, and at 3:30 in the afternoon we were standing in the road outside the National School at the bottom of the hill, doing nothing whatever. Are we waiting for somebody? We are watching a man work, said Holmes. It is the only thing I have left to do, and I do not expect to enjoy it. The windows of the lower room were open to the street because it was mild, and we could hear it all. 40 boys chanting something, and then not chanting it, and then a voice. It was a good voice. It did not shout. It went through a piece of arithmetic twice, once fast and once slowly, and then it asked a boy named Pargeter what he thought, and waited longer than most men would, and then said, "That is nearly it. Say it again, and put the shillings first." And Pargeter said it again and got it, and there was a small sound from the room that I have not heard often in my life, which is 39 boys being pleased that the 40th has managed something. At 4 they came out. Underhill came out last with his gown over his arm, and 6 of them round him, and one very small one had him by 2 fingers and was walking backwards and talking, and Underhill was listening to him with his whole face. He did not see us. We were across the road by the pillar box, and he was going the other way, up the hill, towards Ivy Lane, at the unhurried pace of a man who has done the same thing at the same hour for 19 years. I found that my mouth was dry. "Holmes," I said, "are you certain?" "You would rather I were not." "I would rather a great many things." "So should I." He was watching the man go up the hill. "Watson, if the wicked went about with a squint and a scar, we should not need each other's company for a week together. Look at what you have just seen, and remember it, because you will be asked in June whether you can reconcile it, and the answer is that there is nothing to reconcile. He is a good schoolmaster. He was a good friend for 29 years. He gave away his mother's money without being asked, and on one night in March, in about the time it takes to say a sentence, he found that there was a thing he wanted more than he wanted to be any of those, and he has spent 5 years being all of them again on top of it. We went up the hill after him at a distance, and at the top He turned in at his own gate, and we went past it and round by the field path. That path runs along the backs of the 6 villas of Ivy Lane, between the gardens and the field, with a paling on one side and a hedge on the other, and at the end of the last garden but one there is a gate. Holmes took out his watch at Underhill's gate, and walked at an ordinary walking pace along the paling, counting the gardens, and stopped at the scullery door of the Larches. 3 minutes and 50 seconds, he said, in the dark, with a hedge to go by, and a gate you have used 100 times, say 5. He was in his own front room at 11:20, with a book in his hand, which is where he says he was, and where I have no doubt he was, and he could be standing where I am standing at 25 minutes to 12, and back in his own chair by 10 minutes to, with the lane in front of him, and the whole of Forest Hill between him and any question. He put the watch away, and looked at the pink brick of the study window over the low fence. And that is the last piece of it, and it proves nothing at all, and I would give a good deal for one honest witness instead. Come along. I want a telegram sent to Bradstreet, and I want the rest of tomorrow morning alone with Mrs. Iredale, and I would sooner do almost anything else than what I am going to do to her between 11 and 4. We went to the Larches on the Wednesday at 4 in the afternoon, and Holmes had been there since 11 in the morning, alone with her, and I do not know what was said in those 5 hours, and I have never asked. What I saw when I came was a woman sitting in the back parlour, in a chair set square to the window, in a grey dress instead of the black, with her hands still, and her son standing behind her. Bradstreet was by the door, with a sergeant in the hall behind him. The photograph had been taken off the piano. Underhill came at 4, because he came at 4 on Wednesdays. He stopped in the doorway when he saw the room, and looked at each of us in turn, and last and longest at her, and I watched him understand. "Rhoda," he said. "Sit down, Mr. Underhill," said Holmes. He sat down. He put his hat on the floor beside the chair, and took off his spectacles and folded them into his breast pocket, and folded his hands, and waited, and he was very composed. I had thought I might see a man go to pieces. I saw a man settle himself as one does before a long piece of business. "I am going to give you the facts in their order," said Holmes, "and I want no interruption, and at the end you may say what you please." He gave them. It took 11 minutes by the clock on the mantel, and he did not raise his voice once, and he did not look at Underhill while he spoke. He looked at the middle of the carpet, the way a man does when he is reading from something he can see. The lamp, the wheel turned off, the wick unburnt and square, the reservoir empty and its fillers screwed home, the base dented and whole. The floor, 14 square feet burned through in a line from the door to the fireplace, 9 feet from where the lamp stood, in a room whose desk still had 2 legs under it, and the arithmetic of what a pint of oil can and cannot do. The oil, 3 parts of a 2-gallon can, filled at Wardle's on the Saturday, standing under the copper on the Tuesday, empty by the back door on the Wednesday. The bolt, shot at 9:30 by a servant who has never been believed about it, and found drawn back in the morning, drawn back, therefore, from inside the house by somebody who meant to come in again by it. The hour, A lamp burning at 11:15, on his own sworn evidence and on Reuben Iredale's. A study with no light under its door at 20 minutes to 12, on the evidence of the woman sitting in that chair. A room in full flame at 10 minutes to 12. The head, a fracture of the vault, put down by a kind doctor to masonry from a chimney breast, which the assessor's plan shows standing to the ceiling, with its own mantel shelf unmoved. "And last," said Holmes, "though it is not evidence and no court will ever hear it, this. At 10:30 that night, Mrs. Iredale caught the lamp with her sleeve and set it back near the edge. 3 people in the world knew that. She knew it, her husband knew it, and he was dead within the hour. And you knew it, because she told you at her own front door as she let you in 6 or 7 words, as a woman says a thing that means nothing." Underhill sat quite still. "At the inquest," said Holmes, "you were asked one question about that lamp, and you gave one answer, and it was a true answer, and it was the most useful lie I have ever come across. And afterwards you told her to say nothing about the cocoa, because it could do no good now. From that day she has not been able to look at the 15th of March without meeting her own hand on the lamp, and a woman who cannot look at an evening does not remember standing at the top of her own stairs at 20 minutes to 12 and seeing a dark door. That is what you bought with one sentence, Mr. Underhill, and it has held for 5 years, and it held until a fortnight ago." The clock ticked. Somewhere at the back of the house a tap was running and was turned off. Underhill uncrossed his hands and looked up, and his voice, when it came, was perfectly level and rather gentle, and he spoke as I imagine he spoke to a boy who had made a mess of his Latin. "Mr. Holmes, that is a remarkable piece of work, and I have been listening to it with a good deal of admiration. I want you to understand that I mean that. It is also entirely without proof." He turned his head to Bradstreet. "Inspector, I am 46 years old. I have taught in the same school for 19 years. I have never in my life been in a police court. I called on my oldest friend at 11 o'clock at night with a piece of music. I stayed 9 or 10 minutes. I went home, and at midnight I ran up that lane in my nightshirt. You may take me if you like. You will not keep me, and you know it, and this gentleman knows it." "That is my own opinion," said Bradstreet. "Then we are agreed." Underhill picked up his hat from the floor and did not stand. "I shall deny it tomorrow, and I shall deny it in 10 years, and there is nothing in any box or any drawing that can make me do otherwise. And by Sunday the parish will be saying that a London detective came down here and worried a sick woman into an accusation. I am sorry for that, Rhoda. I am sorry for the whole of it. But I will not sit in this room and be told I killed Emlyn." And then Mrs. Iredale spoke, for the first time since he had come in. "Desmond," she said, "I am going to Cardiff." He turned his head. "Owen goes into the Bristol house at the Quarter, and I have written to my sister at Newport, and I am going down on the 8th of next month, and I shall not be coming back to this house or to this lane." She had her hands folded in her lap, and she did not raise her voice at all. "I am telling you now, in front of these gentlemen, so that there is no letter afterwards, and no coming to the station. You are not to write to me. You are not to send anything to Owen. Whatever the inspector does or does not do, that part is finished, and it is finished today. Rhoda, and I want you to know one thing before I go, because it is the only thing I have got, and I have waited 5 years for it." She looked at him then, and her voice went down rather than up. "I did not do it. I have got that back. I moved a lamp 2 inches, and I have paid for it every night since '92, and I did not do it, and I know I did not do it, and I shall know it in Cardiff, and I shall know it when I am 70. She stopped for a moment. "I do not want your looking after any more. I never wanted it. I only could not stand up without it." I have thought since that if she had wept, or if she had accused him, he would have walked out of that house a free man and stayed free. She did neither. She stopped needing him, out loud, in front of witnesses, and I saw the thing he had built for 5 years come down. It was not dramatic. His face did not change much. He put his hat back on the floor very carefully, as if it were breakable, and he sat looking at his own knees for perhaps half a minute, and when he spoke, his voice had gone thin and rather high. "You were going to Wales," he said. Nobody answered. In January, he came and told me about the money, and he cried in my front room, and I sold my mother's Great Western stock, and I gave him £300, and I was glad to do it, and I would do it again tomorrow. He was speaking to the carpet. And in the February, he came again, and he sat in the same chair, and he told me about Cardiff, and he was pleased, and he said, "You shall come down in the summer, Des. There's the sea." And I said, "That will be very jolly." His hands had begun to shake. 29 years I had known him. I had known him since he was 9, and I sat there and I said, "That will be very jolly." And I thought, in 6 weeks I shall not see her again, and I shall be an old man in a lane, and there is nothing in the world I can do about it, because he has done nothing wrong. That is what I could not get past. He had not done one wrong thing. If he had beaten her, I could have gone on. "Mr. Underhill," said Bradstreet, and began the caution. Underhill went on straight through it, quite quietly, as though the inspector were not in the room. "I had no notion of it when I came up the lane. I want that believed, and I know it cannot be. I had the anthem in my hand, and I had marked the bass part for him." He wiped his mouth. "She opened the door, and she was on the stairs with her hair down, and she said the thing about the lamp, and she laughed, and she went up. And I stood in that hall for a moment, and I have never in my life had a thought arrive so complete. It came whole, Mr. Holmes, every part of it, the oil under the copper, and the bolt, and what she had just said to me, and what I should say at the inquest. It took about as long as it takes to say." He put his hands over his face. He never turned round. He was doing his returns, and he had a cold, and he said, "Is that you, Des? Shut the door, there's a draught." And I shut the door. He was tried at the Old Bailey in the June, and he pleaded guilty against the advice of his counsel, who had been retained by the parish, 41 of whom had signed a paper saying that a mistake had been made. He would not let the plea be changed. He was hanged in the August. I have never been able to make my mind up about the letter he wrote to Holmes from the condemned cell, and I do not print it, but I will say that it contained no request of any kind, which is unusual, and that the last line of it was, "Please tell her that I never once forgave her for anything, because there was nothing to forgive, and I have known that every day." Mrs. Iredale went to Newport on the 8th of May. Owen Iredale went into the Bristol house and is a partner in it now, and there is a small girl in that family who is called Rhoda, and once a year, at Christmas, a hamper arrives at Baker Street containing a ham, a bottle of something Welsh, and no card whatever, which Holmes affects not to notice, and which he has never once failed to open on the day. The tin box went into the Thames off Waterloo Bridge, at her request, on the evening she left London. She would not have it burned. She said she had had enough of burning, and I have always thought that was the most sensible thing said by anybody in the whole affair. We walked back along the embankment afterwards in a warm grey drizzle. "You are pleased with yourself," I said. "I am not, particularly." Holmes had his hands in his pockets. "I refused that woman on a Tuesday morning and told her to see a nerve specialist, and if you had been out on your rounds that day, she would have gone home to Forest Hill and married him in the autumn." "You came round?" "I came round because a doctor stood in front of my fire and told me that a woman who gives you a date, an hour, and 5 actions in the right order, without one repetition, is not ill." He glanced sideways. "You may have that one, Watson. I shall want it back if you ever write it up, but you may have it for a fortnight." The tide was going out, and the lamps had come on along the far bank. "What I cannot get out of my head," I said, "is the 5 years, not the fire, the 5 years. No, nor can I, and I have been turning it over since Wednesday." He walked on a little way. "Murder is a common thing, and I have grown coarse about it. But to look at a woman across a Sunday table for 5 years, knowing that the weight she is carrying is one you put on her yourself, and to be thanked for it every week, and to go home afterwards and play the harmonium." He stopped and looked out at the water. "I have met a great many men who were prepared to kill for love, Watson. He is the first I ever met who was prepared to be loved for it."